Abraham has been our friend for the last year or so. We've been studying him since I think around the 13th chapter of Genesis. Maybe it was the 11th. No matter, it's been wonderful getting to know him. We are up to the 18th chapter of Genesis every Wednesday night here. It's recorded. We record on Wednesday nights and we study Genesis. Usually on Sundays, we record the book of Romans, and typically we'll post those two Bible studies each week. Sometimes we're a little behind, but this week we are in the 18th chapter of Genesis. Let's go ahead and read the 6th verse. And Abraham hastened into the tent and unto Sarah and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. I really love the sense of courteous urgency that Abraham is employing in his hospitality. Like I said, when we opened our coverage of this chapter, the way this is written, I can see in my mind's eye this lovely scene. Abraham dashing into the kitchen to quickly muster up his wife's masterful bread-making skills. Sarah looking at him as if he's lost his mind. Abraham, in the middle of the day, I put all the bread-making stuff in the cupboard. Let me give you another sign of the authenticity of this passage. If this is a forgery, if this is a made-up story, then somebody did their homework. You see, in those days and in that culture, bread wasn't just sitting out on the kitchen counter waiting for someone to wander in and slice off a chunk of it for a midday snack. Bread was only made when it was needed. This story is a true reflection of that little fact. It's subtle, and if it were left out or somehow modified, no one would have noticed. That's why this could not have been invented. Everything about it gives you a sense that this is an honest report of an actual event. Now, I know this might be getting tedious, but let me reiterate something. This is a man who knows how to take care of strangers. We've alluded to that already, but there's a heck of a lot of food here so far. More to come, but let me deal with this part first. From this description, we can figure that this was going to be a huge snack. Remember, only 3 men have stopped by, and Abraham and Sarah are preparing a feast big enough for a small army. But listen to me, any army would be thrilled to get this sort of food. Do you see there the word cakes? Well, this isn't just some boring old desert wheat toast. The original word describes a round loaf that's fried twice in fat or milk, a very generous and a very yummy refreshment to offer a few raw strangers. Listen to me. When God is training you, when God is guiding you, you're just going to be overflowing with thoughtfulness and kindness. It's just that simple. But listen, Abraham's not done yet. These guys are going to have to waddle to their final destination. John, why are we going through this so slowly? Listen, if God took the time to give us all these details, I think it's only right that we should savor every little bit of it. Verse 7, and Abraham ran into the herd and fetched a calf tender and good and gave it unto a young man, and he hasted to dress it. There he goes again. Abraham is running all over the place, getting his wife to run all over the place. Now his servants, all just to make sure these travelers are well taken care of. The picture that's being drawn for us here is more than, just throwing a few things together quickly. This is a rapid, intense operation. Abraham and Sarah are putting this meal together with urgency. Again, this is pure kindness. He figures these hikers don't want to hang around too long in one spot. They're on a journey, and Abraham wants to make sure they fulfill their goals for the day on a full tummy, even though he doesn't even know what those goals are. A truly courteous person makes your priorities their priorities. And Abraham ran into the herd and fetched a calf tender and good and gave it unto a man, and he hasted to dress it. And he took butter and milk and the calf which he had dressed and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. Come on, isn't this a lovely scene? He brings out their lavish meal and then kind of slips away so that they can eat in peace. He's not going to hover over them, but he's not going to be too far away either. The phrase stood by them is meant to give us the impression that Abraham was stationed at the ready, waiting for their next need. I think we mentioned this part already, but the word butter is a bit of a misnomer, at least it is in our day. This was likely some sort of curds or yogurt, maybe. The milk, some say, should be called sweet milk, and it was probably a sort of cheese. My friends, this was an especially fine meal. It was a feast of the highest quality and quantity, actually. This was a big, beautiful spread. Now, the last four words of verse 18 are probably the most interesting in the whole chapter. And they did eat. Now, I want you to get into this with me. This is an incredibly kind gesture. How so? Well, these three were not human. They were angels. And yet they ate food just to be polite. I don't even know how they pulled it off, but I guess if they were good enough to fool everyone into thinking they weren't divine beings, pretending to eat food in a convincing way couldn't have been all that difficult. But nonetheless, this is beautiful. They didn't turn Abraham down. They probably wouldn't have been able to stop him if they tried, but they didn't, because even though they were higher beings in every sense of the word, they didn't consider it beneath them to show the common courtesy of accepting the kindness of a princely nomad. Have I told you how much I love this story? And here's where things get downright interesting. Verse 9, and they said unto him, where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. Now I suspect that this was the moment Abraham realized who he was dealing with. Somehow this man knows his wife's name. Now, of course, this couldn't have been Abraham's first and only clue. Certainly things were starting to stack up. He was probably already beginning to suspect that these weren't ordinary strangers. There must have been a few indications that the men that showed up at Abraham's tent were distinct. I don't imagine it's very easy to hide divinity. We are led to believe that Abraham was unaware of their angelic nature, but I suspect he wasn't entirely unaware of their exceptional qualities. He must have had his suspicions that all was not as it seemed. And then they say, verse 9, where is Sarah thy wife? Now, it's kind of interesting that the Bible says they asked where Sarah was, but that's what it says. Where is Sarah thy wife? Now, I'd be an idiot and ask who wants to know. But I think Abraham was finally catching on, because he says unhesitatingly, behold, in the tent. Yeah, he may have been just responding politely to an honest question, but doesn't it now seem like there's more to it than that? I mean, it's obvious he didn't in the beginning recognize the divine nature of these men. Otherwise, as I keep saying, he would have never offered them a meal. But I'm going to repeat that for emphasis. Surely he knew they weren't. Surely if he had not known that they were, if he had known that they really weren't men, he would have not offered them something to eat. And yet he prepares and lays out a feast for these guys. That tells me he wasn't clued in initially. But from what we read, by the time this chapter closes out, Abraham seems to have discovered the truth of who these strangers were, and we know that by the things he says to them. But there's nothing to tell us exactly when that realization happened. Perhaps this is it. Perhaps this is that moment where Abraham realizes who these guys really are. And they said unto him, where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. How'd they know her name? And why is everything about them so wonderfully strange? These guys are angels. But then one of them says something that surely seals the realization. And they said unto him, where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, behold, in the tent. Here comes the light bulb moment. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. And here it's been suggested by many experts is the very reason for this rather unusual visit. Now, I agree with that, but I argue that it's one of the reasons for the visit, but not the only reason. Nonetheless, this is why they're here. Now, if there had been any doubt as to the divine character of these three men, I believe it was all wiped away with this very statement. I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. This is the voice of authority. This is an exposition of self-assurance, of rock-solid confidence that only God can possess. And don't forget, Abraham knows God. He knows how God acts. He knows the way God says things. That light bulb is fully illuminated now. Abraham now knows he's dealing with God. This couldn't be a man because no man could be so audacious as to say, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. Such confidence, such boldness. Truly, this is the way someone who is omniscient speaks. So imagine this scene. What we have here is better than any Hollywood script, mainly because it's true and it happened. The three extraordinary strangers are, at least they are appearing to be eating a feast fit for a savior. And then surely the most exceptional of the three, the obvious leader of the group, after finding out where Sarah was, by the way, he already knew, this incomparable one I'm sure Abraham is now looking at with awe and worship, looks up from his lovely meal and says something so mysterious and so intriguing, it must have brought chills to Abraham when he heard it. The King James reads, I will certainly return. Now, I think that's the best possible translation. The more modern translations, probably from the book that you're reading, they're just as good, most using the word surely. Surely I will return. But really, neither is completely accurate. Now, this may seem like a minor point, but I want to mention it to you because, well, it's interesting, and perhaps to get you to see how difficult it is to translate Hebrew. The literal translation is more like returning, I will return. No wonder the English language translators decided to go in another direction, returning, I will return. A mind that thinks in English, and modern English at that, would not be able to easily unpack the literal Hebrew. But the reason it comes out that way, the reason God said it that way, is for emphasis. And an ancient Hebrew mind would get it. God was talking to ancient Hebrew minds, and so he said, returning, I will return. The point is, the Lord's return in the next year, and we'll get to that in a second, his return is without question. The leader of that group, again, who happens to be God himself in human form, do not ask me because I don't know. God himself in human form uses an expression in the Hebrew that gives the hearer absolute confidence in his sincerity. The way God says this is meant to communicate the sense of certainty and inevitability. Now, wrap your heads around this. This is God speaking. Everything God says happens. His promise to return upon the birth of Isaac is no different. Then why use the emphatic statement? Does God have to demonstrate that he means it when he says something? Well, to some people he does. You see, this most remarkable among the three remarkable strangers isn't actually talking to Abraham. I don't think Abraham would need an emphatic statement once he knew this stranger was actually God. God's already come through on everything he said to Abraham, and he knows when God says something, it happens. I think Abraham is probably already sure this is God, or at least 99% sure. And a doubled statement like that wouldn't likely add much to Abraham's confidence. But there is someone who perhaps doesn't have the same level of experience with divine statements as Abraham does, who is also listening. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee. Returning, I will return to the time, according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. And by the way, this is much more than hearing. The original Hebrew makes it more active than that. Sarah is actually listening at the tent door. She isn't just hearing, she isn't walking by and all of a sudden she heard something interesting. She's listening. This, listen to me, is the purpose for the visit to Abraham. Jehovah came down to announce to Sarah that she's going to give birth to the promised seed. This is one of the reasons this is such a unique appearance by God. This appearance is different because God has a different audience than he normally does. He's incognito, as it were, because he has a message to deliver to a newbie, to a brand new recipient. Now, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but this discussion fits here. The Lord has appeared to make sure, listen to me because this is important. The Lord is there to make sure Sarah knows his plans for her, and he's really doing it in the most ingenious fashion. This method, this strategy is perfect. You see, God couldn't just barge in and announce this blessing. He couldn't have just shown up as a bright light to unveil his plans. He couldn't even just kind of burst into the tent in that human form and make that announcement. Those sorts of methods would be distracting and create anxiety, and they'd be downright over dramatic. God sets this whole thing up to make sure it runs smoothly. He appears as wandering strangers. That gets them into the tent. Abraham is not going to be able to resist an opportunity to be helpful to visitors, and God knows it. God creates just enough of a mysterious and exciting environment to make Sarah curious, which then brings her to where she can hear what's going on. Travelers appearing out of nowhere in the middle of a hot desert day is going to get some attention. It's going to stoke some snooping. And then when the excitement is being channeled into service to strangers, God, knowing his intended audience is within earshot, makes this incredible declaration. Lo, Sarah, thy wife shall have a son. Shaking hand raised to the mouth, back there behind the tent door in total shock and disbelief. It's beautiful. Now, why all the drama? Why the mystery? Why not just appear to Abraham like you've done before, tell Abraham your plans, and just instruct him to tell his wife? Seems simple. Surely there'd be no risk that the message wouldn't get passed on, right? Why didn't God just keep it simple? Well, because as important as Abraham's faith has been thus far, that's how important Sarah's will be going forward. Listen, she's no longer just along for the ride. Now she's a participant, and her faith will be a crucial element in the success of God's plan, just like Abraham's has been so far. If anything gets your ears perked up about what the Bible says, it should be this. This is so important that God devised an elaborate plan to pass on a message to a fence-sitting cog in the wheel. Listen, Sarah has not shown much of a spiritual IQ thus far, and God needs to get that fixed quickly. So he comes down himself to get things done. And he said, I will certainly return. Returning, I will return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah, thy wife, shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now let's real quickly cover another contested part of this passage. I don't want to spend too long here, but this is a tricky verse to interpret. First of all, as we've said, God is actually talking to two people. I know from all appearances this dialogue seems to be just between Abraham and God, but Sarah, as God planned, is within earshot, actively listening. And what does he say? God said he'd return. He said, unto you, I will return unto thee, unto you. But he was not referring to Abraham. God was going to return to Sarah because that baby was not going to be born without him being present. This is going to be a miracle baby like none other up to that point the most significant birth right up until the virgin birth. The you God was referencing in that statement was Sarah. God knew she was there. Of course he did. And so he was talking to her. I will appear to you, Sarah, at the time of life. That's the other tricky part. The Hebrew is no easier to break down for us than the English. What is the time of life? Well, some people think it means the springtime. Others say the word means to revive, and it's used here to indicate the time that the year will revive, meaning this same time next year. This time will revive. It'll come back around. And when it does, Abraham, wink, Sarah, I'll come back and your son will be born. And then still others interpret this to mean the time it takes for a woman to grow a baby full term, the 9-month gestation period, and the clock started right at that moment. And that's why God will be back when that time period is completed. And I honestly can't say for sure what I think it means, but if pressed to make a choice, I'd opt for the interpretation regarding the spring. The concept, the overall concept is bringing life to that which is dead. In the winter, life is scarce. Even in the warm climate that Abram and Sarah called home, plant life and some animal life go dormant over the winter, and they appear as if they're dead. Spring comes and all of that revives, re-lifes, as that word revive breaks down to me. Life replaces death, and isn't that what's going to happen to Abraham and Sarah? Isn't the springtime the perfect time for life to come from a couple's loins that were once dead? Of course it would be. A springtime birth would enhance the excitement of the event. The long winter of barrenness of Abram and Sarah will come to an end next spring. Yeah, the biblical evidence for that interpretation is a little sparse, but I wouldn't put it past God to do it that way, would you? Now, one more thing about this verse, and he said, I will certainly return unto thee. Returning, I will return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now, I want to talk briefly about an enormously important point brought out very subtly in this 10th verse. In verse 9, they, the inference somehow means collectively, the three men inquired about the location of Abraham's wife, Sarah. Abraham tells them she's behind the tent door. And then the leader of the group says, I will return unto you according to the time of life. Now, we've already said that this leader is God or a Christophany. I don't believe it's a Christophany, but it could be. And he's talking directly to Sarah. He says to Sarah that he will return according to the time of life. Now, the thing I want to bring up is this is going to be a different type of appearance. God is not going to visit Sarah in the same way he visits and has visited Abraham, and certainly not the way he's visiting them now in this event. In fact, a very different word altogether is used in the original. Now, I'm going to skip ahead in our story to read to you the record of that moment. It's only a few chapters away. We'll get to it soon enough. Here it is, chapter 21, verse 1 and 2. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. Now, he usually appears this time he visits. He usually appears this time he visits. In the Hebrew, appear is ra'ah, and visit is paquad, two different words inferring a different type of appearing. And then the next verse tells us the actual nature, but mostly the result of that visit. Verse 2, for Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. Friends, let me repeat. That baby boy Isaac would not have been born without God. The baby was not going to be born without direct intervention from God. That's why God visited. That's why God showed up. He wasn't there to just chat. God was there to create an amazing miracle. Remember, God only arrives down here if he has to, and in this case, he had to. That baby was a miracle baby. Listen, not to be TMI, but the baby-making abilities of Abraham and Sarah were revived in that moment by God's appearance. A miracle, honestly, like no other in the Bible, in my opinion. God himself came down to perform a miracle. God had to return personally for that baby to be born. Had God not done that, there would be no Messiah, there would be no redemption, there would be no reconciliation. Now, why did God do it that way? Why did it take him to do this directly? Couldn't God just have designated some normal baby boy to the line through which the Messiah came? And forgive me for saying, the only thing Isaac ever did for God is provide the physical foundation for the family of Jesus. He did almost nothing else. And if I'm being honest, he's rather a disappointment. He becomes an unremarkable adult who's sort of a lifelong mama's boy. Now, we'll discuss all of that when we come to it. So why Isaac? And why not just set aside some other naturally conceived and delivered male, set everything up, make sure everything goes right, make sure history comes together, and establish the Messianic dynasty? Why not pick someone out of someone else's family? These two had a baby boy. He's pretty good. Let's go ahead and make him the head of that Messianic dynasty. Well, I have a one-word answer. Grace. No human, no man on earth can claim the credit for producing the line of the Messiah. It's just like that one-sided covenant God struck with Abraham, and frankly, every covenant or any interaction God has had with anyone. Human effort, human responsibility, human action is not involved. Grace. All right, I feel like I want to continue to talk more about this, but I promised it would be brief. Promise broken. We've got much more to cover in this chapter, but let's close it here for now. See you next time.